you're the expert in your own life and you know yourself better than anyone else. So what I hope you gain from tonight's session are a few nuggets of information that can help you make your volunteer experience just slightly better, or maybe just a little bit more rewarding for yourself or for the individuals that you're serving. So think of, if we're taking this as the analogy of the buffet, think of your plate for tonight as a piece of paper, and your utensil is a pen or pencil. So if you don't have either of those with you right now, take the time now to go and grab them really quickly, because it's hard to sample the buffet without a plate and utensils. So give you a few quick seconds to grab a piece of paper and a pen. You can always use your phone, but I'm old school, and I really encourage you to go old school and use a paper and a pen. It does wonderful things for your brain. All right, so let's get started. So we've all been in situations where there were volunteers who made our experience special, or sometimes not so special. So not that we are in a volunteer position, but that we are in a position where we've been doing something where we've been supported by volunteers. So sometimes it was that the volunteer did something like spectacular, or went out of their way to do something for us that saved the day or made the experience what it otherwise wouldn't have been. Other times it was that the volunteer, didn't do anything extraordinary, but just did their job really, really well. And that in and of itself was the key to our enjoyment or to our success. So there have also likely been some times when a volunteer stood out, but not necessarily for the right reasons. So what I want you to do right now, this is where you grab your pen and paper, is I want you to think back to a time when you were at an event, not as a volunteer, but in another role, maybe as an athlete or conference, for example, whatever, where there were volunteers that supported your experience. So take your piece of paper and make two columns. Okay? One column is going to be titled helpful behaviors, and the other column is titled unhelpful behaviors. Right? So I want you to think back to some of your previous experiences. Again, not as a volunteer, but when you were supported by volunteers. So it could be like a local road race you did, as an example, or a conference you attended. So I want you to think back, what stands out in your mind as you recall these experiences when it comes to volunteer behaviors of volunteers. So whatever comes to mind, write it down in the appropriate column, whether it was helpful behavior, unhelpful behaviors. Think about the behaviors that helped you have a great day, or that helped you maybe just have a day where you didn't even notice that there were volunteers in a good way, right? It's kind of like sometimes they're the best referees are the referees that you don't even know they're there. The game just goes well. So whatever comes to mind, write it down. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about this. Okay, so, and when I said seconds, I was literal in the seconds. So what I'd like you to do, the chat box should be open now so that you can jot down some of your responses. What I want you to do in the chat box, I encourage you to type out maybe one or two behaviors that fall in the helpful category. So maybe the most helpful for you in those moments, in that experience. Okay, so go ahead and type out in the chat box, preferably to all panelists so that I can read it as well, one or two behaviors that fall into that helpful category. Okay, gave clear directions. Awesome. Fun games. Okay. Friendly, problem solver. Awesome. Accommodating or flexible. Good. Attentive. Empathy. Anything else comes to mind that was helpful? So when I was thinking of this, and that's why I put the pictures up that I did, is, enthusiasm, happy, yeah, a smile, sometimes just a thumbs up. So Now what I want you to do is I want you to put in the chat one or two of the not so helpful behaviors that maybe got in the way for you, or it just didn't do it for you. What might some of those behaviors been? Again, it's the behaviors on the part of the volunteer. Okay, so Kathy, distracted, no acknowledgement. Okay, so kind of like not even knowing you're there. Anything else? Any other behaviors? Unfriendly, bad mood. Yeah, uninterested in what's going on. Cool. Okay. So awesome. So the reason not done in a timely manner, yeah, not engaged, right? Cool. So the reason I asked you to think back to these things is I find it, right, it's interesting what we think is important for us when we are in volunteer roles, but what we notice the most when we're the ones that are being supported by volunteers. What are the behaviors that we find the most helpful? So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind for a few moments as we go through the next slide, and then you'll see how this comes back. All right. So the next step is to know thyself. And you'll see in a few seconds why I put up pictures of superheroes. So I want you to think, again, take your piece of paper, and I want you to think about what are your best qualities and characteristics, like the part of your personality that thrives in the volunteer role. Right. So often it might be the 3 or 4 things that others most often comment on about you. Like, for example, it could be your smile, your organization, your clear and direct voice and communication. Could be your ability to rebound and think on the spot. I don't know. I want you to think of these. I call these your volunteer superpowers. Okay. So I want you to think about what are your best qualities and characteristics. So on that same piece of paper, list those characteristics right now. So again, there may be 3 or 4 characteristics, qualities that are the things that, you know, when people see you in your role, they comment on those. Like, those are the things that make you you. And why I put up the superhero here is, again, these are your superpowers as a volunteer, whether it's a coach, whatever it is that you do, whatever your role is, your specific role as a volunteer, is it really is a role, right? A role is something that we do or that we take on that is kind of like our costume that we put on for that role, right? We put on our coaching costume, we put on our athlete costume, we put on our whatever costume it is. And it's important. How do you want to, in order to be the best that you can be in your role, you have to be very clear, right? Like, we know, for example, Wonder Woman, we know what her characteristics are. We don't ever confuse them with, I don't know, Catwoman, for example, or we don't confuse Batman with Superman. All right. So the idea is I want you to think about those characteristics that are unique to you, that they stand out. And apparently I can turn on my video here. Let's see if I can do that. I don't even know if I want to. I'm just kidding. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can turn on my video. Hello, everybody. I am here. Okay. So, where was I? I'm going to take myself away so I don't see myself and I don't distract myself. There we go. Okay. So, so now what I want you to do is I want you to combine the characteristics that you wrote down that were helpful. So the characteristics that you wrote down before in that column that was helpful behaviors, I want you to bring some of those in and combine them with your volunteer superpowers. So again, your characteristics that you wrote out about yourself, right? So combine your superpowers with some of the behaviors that you identified before from the helpful behaviors column. So what you're doing here is you're putting together what is called your alter ego. or what I would like to call your volunteer superhero persona. Right? So this includes the behaviors and characteristics that make you the best that you can be. We're not listing out 1,000 things here. It's maybe a handful, maximum, like 5, 6 maximum things that are critical to your, your best behavior, your best as a volunteer. Right? So take some time to combine these, and now you're creating a new persona. And if you would have a superhero representing that persona, what would that be? Who would that superhero be? And it doesn't have to be like, oh, it's a Wonder Woman or Spider-Man or it's whatever. You can create your own superhero. Like I said at the beginning, you are the expert in your own life. You are your own superhero. And you might think, well, this is kind of like, okay, I'm not a superhero, but you are. And this is a tool. This alter ego is a tool that I use with athletes, that I use with coaches. And it's based on science. It's not just frou-frou. It's not just taken out of thin air. Where once we adopt, we know who we want to be in a certain role, and we put on our costume, we adopt these characteristics, we really are able to express ourselves in that role much better. Right? So you've combined those things, and that's really important. You've now created a list of like maybe 4 or 5 things, right, that really highlight the behaviors, the characteristics, the personality of this volunteer superhero that you are. So next, the thing is that we all have bad days, right? And we all have moments where things aren't so great. And why? Why? Because we're human. So next is to identify the characteristics and personality traits that are the most likely to come out when you're tired, for example, or you haven't slept well, or you've not eaten well, or you're on day like 6 of your volunteer shift and you've been wearing, I don't know, the same socks for the past 5 days. So the characteristics, the personality traits that can come out in those moments. I call those the kryptonite moments. Okay. So think about your moments, the kryptonite moments. What are they? What are the signs and symptoms that tell you you're possibly heading into that phase, into that zone? Like, how do you know? So I want you to take that same piece of paper, because this is important. Write it down, write those down. They could be physical signs and symptoms. They could be emotional signs and symptoms, psychological signs and symptoms. How do you know when you're getting close to that kryptonite moment? Okay, so for me, I start to get kind of short. I start to be like short answers. I am short. Like in height, I'm short, but I start to get short in my answers. I start to get very like, I shut down. I close off kind of the world around me. I answer in very like 1-2 word sentences. I stop smiling. Those are things, right? Like I can tell when I start to do those behaviors, or when I start to engage in those behaviors, that, whew, I'm losing it right now, right? So you've written those down, your signs and symptoms of your kryptonite moments. So now that you're aware of this, the key is, first, you got to do what you can ahead of time to prepare and take care of yourself, to give you the most strength to be able to handle the kryptonite. So that means, we can address the kryptonite when we're in the moment, but better is if in preparation for your role, you can say, okay, what do I need to do to be the best that I can be? What are the 2 or 3 behaviors that are going to prepare me to deal with the kryptonite? So it may be, for me, I'll tell you my answers. A great night's sleep. And if I can't get a great night's sleep, it's being able to give myself some timeouts throughout the day. So it's like my recharge, right? Like, what are the moments that give me that plug-in? You know how when your phone battery is starting to die off, sometimes you only need like 2% more. That's all you need for this one call. Those are the types of things that I want you to think of. Like, what are the things that you need to do ahead of time? Could be things like basic self-care, like sleep or eat well, right? that whole self-care piece is a topic for a whole other webinar. It's not for this webinar, but I just want you to think of that ahead of time. So what are the behaviors that for you ahead of time, you need to make sure you get your go-tos, that you're like non-negotiables? Okay, so that's important to know. And again, if you haven't written those out, write them out, because you'll see we're creating a plan here, right? That's going to come out and it's going to be really useful for you. So the next most important key is to recognize that when you find yourselves in those kryptonite moments, that all you need to do is to continue to play the role of your superhero, right? You don't need to be the best superhero on the planet. Like when Superman is faced with kryptonite, he's just trying to get by, right? He's just trying to get by as best as he can. So that may mean that now you adopt one of the behaviors that you set out, that you wrote out before. Maybe it's, you know what, to get through the next day, all I'm going to do is smile. That's all I'm going to do. Or all I'm going to do is just, I don't know, whatever your characteristic is, right? So that's the key thing, is you just have to continue to play the role of your superhero, but you have to know what is going to be the characteristic that you're going to rely on. Another way to do this, or to strengthen this behavior, is that you want to have a physical token or a gesture that you use as a reminder or as a reset button, right? That reminds you of your characteristics as a superhero. So it's like Superman's telephone booth, right? Remember when Superman, when he needed to turn into Superman, I may be dating myself here, but when he needed to turn into Superman, he would go into his telephone booth, right? And then he would come out as Superman. Even if Clark Kent was having a not so great day, he would turn into Superman. He would put on his cape, put on his uniform, and he had that beautiful yellow belt, right? That was that physical token, that object, that thing that represented him in his role as Superman. And we all have those things as coaches, as volunteers. Could be our volunteer shirt, could be our whistle, could be our hat. So what token can you use to represent your volunteer superhero persona? Again, it could be a bracelet, a piece of clothing, could be a hairstyle. Like I did this with one of my younger athletes this week. And one of her superhero characteristics was she thought of Pink, like the artist, Pink, the singer. And she said, Pink's got this cool hair. And so what we talked about was getting her, before she gets ready for hockey, which she plays hockey, is to put her hair in this crazy bun. And that was her signal that, okay, I'm getting into the Pink mode. I'm getting into my superhero mode, right? So again, it could be a piece of clothing. It could be a hairstyle. It could be a gesture. I want you to come up with something that for you is going to represent it. Now, I understand that in 30 minutes, you're not going to create all of this, but this is your homework. We ask our athletes to do homework. So this is your homework. I want you to come up with something. So what I'll encourage right now is actually, let's go into the chat. Does anybody have any ideas as to what that token may be? What might that be, that object or that gesture? So some athletes, for example, will, like, when it's go time, they'll clap their hands really loud, or they'll do this, I don't know, this gesture of, okay, it's go time, like hands up and away we go. Or I've had some athletes where they use like a little bracelet, like, you know, those little plastic bracelets that sometimes we have as volunteers, and they just, that is the symbol that they hold on to that bracelet, or they touch that bracelet, or they look at that bracelet, and that's their thing. Okay, so from you guys, what might be a token? What might be a gesture that you could use that could, okay, when you put your skates on as a coach, awesome. Yeah, it's go time, absolutely. So those of you that are old enough to remember the movie, The Field of Dreams, yeah, high fives, good. Remember when he stepped onto the field, it's like all of a sudden he was part of the game. It could be that, right? It's a gesture, it's a physical thing. Like you want to bring it into the physical. So we're taking the stuff that's in our head, right? This idea of a superhero, and then we bring it out physically. We have a physical representation. putting on your lanyard with your pen, pencil, and markers. Awesome. Right? It's like, okay, here I am. Deep breaths. Perfect. So it has to be very clear. And like I said, when we do this with athletes, and athletes are no different than coaches, are no different than volunteers, are no different than anybody, right? You're putting on your costume for that day to play that role, whether it's the role of the athlete, whether it's the role of the coach, whether it's the role of the whatever it is. Okay. Awesome. So thanks for sharing, guys. That's fantastic. Well, let's carry on here. Okay. So what's next? Well, what is next there? So, like I said, as volunteers, we're supporting and servicing individuals who are actually doing extraordinary things, right? Like our role is to be there for them. Our role is to kind of fill their gaps, any gaps that they may have, however big or small. We're there to be their strength of mind when they need it, to be the composure when they lack it, to be their rock when they're crumbling. And that requires us to be superheroes, to put on our costume, our cape, and to show up for others. So like athletes do, before you step into your role, take a moment to get your mind into that right role, to get into the right costume. So mentally prepare for the task at hand or the task ahead. So what does that mean? So there's 3 steps here that I've written out. Number 1, review your ideal characteristics, like review your script. If you're going to turn into a certain superhero, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 characteristics that are going to be the keys for you, right? If you think of an athlete doesn't go out onto the ice and think of 10,000 things they have to do. They think of maybe 1 or 2 things, like what's their game? What do they do? And that's what I want you to think about, right? Review your script. So that means by default that you have to have that script written down. So that little piece of paper that you've been writing on, I encourage you to embellish that a little bit. Take a picture of it. Maybe, go back and redo your notes if you want, but take a picture of it. When you get your lanyards, for example, stick that in the back of the lanyard so you know that's your recipe for success, right? So read through your script, review your script. Second, before you step out there for the day, before you put your foot through that line on the field of dreams, before you take that step into that role, imagine yourself in that role, creating the best day for others and for those that you service, as well as for yourself. So get into your mental movie. We ask athletes to use visualization. It's so important for us to do that as well as volunteers, as coaches, as whatever your role is, right? So get into your mental movie, see yourself in your role, hear yourself in your role. What are you going to say? How are you going to be behaving? Right? So feel that day in your mind. You're the actor and the director of your own mental movie. And then the last step out of all of those 3 steps is put on your superhero costume. That's the last thing. It's like put on your lanyard, put on your coach's hat. When you're tying up your skates, getting ready to go out and coach, know that that's your superhero costume, right? And then have that activating agent, right? Like that token, that gesture, that object. Anytime you need to boost your energy in the face of kryptonite, re-engage with your token or your gesture. That's your reset button. Okay. So the idea of becoming your superhero, so the concept of the alter ego this is a topic that's researched in psychology and neuropsychology, and there's strong evidence for the power of it and for the power that it provides individuals to access these personalities and characteristics that are part of them, but that they don't often allow themselves to access. So, in your role as a coach, in your role as a volunteer, in your role as medical staff, whatever it is that your role is, know your superhero characteristics and make sure that those are the things that you prepare to do. Just as you would for an athlete, you would ask them to prepare for this. Do the same thing. This is your mental warm-up, right? This is what you're gonna do that's gonna keep you present, focused, and in the zone as you are engaged in your volunteer experience. So having said that, I want you to think about how can you now take this and put it into your context as a volunteer, into your volunteer role. How would you shape this for yourself, right? There's a lot of information. I've given you some ideas, but how are you going to shape this for yourself? So I want you to think about that. And just, that's the last thing I'm going to ask you to write down on your piece of paper. What would that look like for you? How would you take this kind of recipe of becoming your superhero? Again, writing your script, reviewing your script, creating that mental movie, and then stepping into your costume and having that token or that memento or that object that represents this is where I am. How would you shape all of that to make it work for you in your context? So that is basically, that wraps it up. And what I hope you've gotten is maybe a few little nuggets, right? Again, you are already amazing at what you do. That's why you're in the role that you're in. So the idea is, how do we make this a little bit better for you? What are some of the tools or strategies that you can use that can really help you maximize, your role, maximize what you bring in your role? So I'm going to open up. I'd like to hear from you guys, whether it's hearing through voice or whether it's hearing reading. What's your key takeaway from tonight? What's the thing that either hits home or that you're like, oh, I never thought of that, or that's something I'm going to do? So I would encourage you to put that into the chat, or I don't know if there's a possibility, maybe I'll stop sharing, and then there's a possibility of, there's quite a few people, there's 21, but maybe people want to open up mics and away you go. So Dolores said the importance of planning. Yeah, absolutely.
Just so everyone knows, I've actually unmuted. So you should be asked now, you've been given permission to open your microphone if you would like to ask a question openly.
So I'd encourage you guys, I like to get some, kind of some ideas of what stuck for you. So if you would be so kind and to just put like in the chat one takeaway, maybe your key takeaway from tonight. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, we do get tired, right? And the idea in that situation is not that, you get tired and then you try to be 100% your superhero. It's, what is the one characteristic that I'm going to rely on to just make me at least 50 to 60% better than I was. I'm not trying to be 100%, because on the 4th or 5th day of the games, for example, you're not going to be at 100%, nor should you expect. You're trying to be the best that you can with what you've got, right? Yeah, wearing this uniform, the uniform is key, 100%. And whatever that uniform is for you, super important. Understanding your kryptonite. Yes. Cool. Being mindful of how we are perceived to others, and sometimes recognizing that, everybody's going to have their own characteristics, but also the athletes or the people that we're servicing, the individuals that we're servicing and supporting, they all like different types of coaches. They all like different types of volunteers. Like, I know if I'm doing a race, like I do triathlons, if I'm doing a race, all I want the volunteer for me is just give me my cup of water. Just give me, like, don't try to high five me. I don't like that, but that's just me. Whereas other people love the high five. So you can't be all things to all people, but you can be the best version of yourself. And sometimes this kind of strategy, this approach helps, or at least gives you a way of putting it together.
I like the fact of quiet time in the morning before you're actually moving out of your room. Kind of normalizing what I'm feeling, probably everybody else is as well, so I don't self-criticize. So I really like the reset button, and just going back to those things that we've listed here that we need to do or could be doing to make it work for the athletes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, Sue, right? And the idea is that, you know, I need to be, if I'm going to service the athletes, or if I'm going to be the best that I can be to give the best day possible to those athletes, then I need to take care of myself first. That's why, you know, on planes, I know we haven't been on planes in a long time, but that's why they make you put your mask on first before you help others, right? That's the reason. So you need to know where your mask is. You need to know what your mask is. You need to know what your boost, you know, like your recharge and your reset button is. And if we all do this, then it becomes normal. As you said, it normalizes it. And we know that, okay, I need my 5 minutes that I need to go up and down the stairs because that's going to boost my energy. Or I need to lie down with my legs up in the hallway. I don't know, whatever that is. Any other questions?
I did mine.
So yeah, so someone made a comment to have better awareness of how we are presenting to others. Yeah, especially in a leadership role. Absolutely. Well, you guys are a quiet bunch. You must be tired as well.
The key thing too is keep smiling.
Yes. And Sue, that's such a great point, right? And I didn't get into this because it was not necessarily within the context of this, but you know, there's a whole lot of research that shows that, you know, mood follows action. So whatever your behavior is, adopt the behavior first and your mood will follow, and people will mirror that, right? People will see that. So if I smile, even for like 2 minutes, like I really smile, like right now, and you're just like really full on smile, like just smile, what'll happen is your internal chemistry will change. And we feel that chemistry as human beings, we feel each other's chemistry. So. Cool. Anything else?
Definitely.
Yes.
The smile, the speaking courteously to the athletes, and showing respect to the, of the athletes to the athletes. Extremely helpful, and it gets you a lot of mileage with your work with the athletes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Natasha, I really like the part you verified many of the things that I believe in, and the mental visualization before I go out to work with my athletes.
Awesome.
But
Fantastic.
stay calm.
Yeah, that's
Especially if
right.
you're tired.
Yes.
Yeah, especially if you're tired, stay calm.
Yes. Yeah, I do a turn away and count to 10 and breathe deeply.
Yeah, deep breathing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. The deep breathing, you know what, like take a longer exhale than you do on the inhale. And that will allow you to tap into that rest and digest that parasympathetic nervous system. So it's super important. Awesome. Cool. Well, hopefully you guys got something out of it, some nugget. And I hope it was helpful in some way. And I'm just
Absolutely.
awesome. Well, I thank you guys for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing more from you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ron.
I want to just take a moment on behalf of Special Olympics Canada and all of you, of course, to thank Natasha for her incredibly engaging session. I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways is how many great tools she has presented that are relevant to all of our volunteers, regardless of what hat you might wear. And for many of you here on the session, that's oftentimes more than one. So I think this was incredibly helpful, incredibly relevant for our volunteers. And of course, we want to thank all of you for attending, for being such incredible volunteers, continuing to move the needle forward and continue to show up for our athletes in all of the ways that you continue to do. So happy National Volunteer Week from all of us here. We would like to let you know that this session was recorded. So we will be making this available for anyone who was unable to make it this evening. And then a quick short note for anyone who has, that I don't already have, if you have an NCCP number, we will be putting this in as a PD opportunity. So if you want to drop that information to me in the chat, or you can send me a quick email. I'm going to volunteer Kendra here as well, who's on the session, that if you've got the link to her through the NTP, if you want to send that information to her, we'll make sure that this is put up in the locker as well as a great PD opportunity. So again, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your National Volunteer Week. And we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you again for being a part of our session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank
See
you,
you
everyone.
again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for hosting.
Oh, thank you.
It's cool.
It's going to be, Allison, it's going to be great to share this. I think it's going to be very, very important. So maybe I'll send you an email when you send it out, but I'd like to share it with all our volunteers, at least all our coaches and managers in our programs in Greater Durham.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Yes, we are hoping for the same uptake. Again, obviously, we think very highly of the session and of Natasha, but certainly we feel that this is such a great and very relevant session kind of across the board for volunteers.
Absolutely, I would agree.
Yeah, for sure.
And not just for volunteering, for life. So thank you.
Yes,
Thank
that too.
you.
Yeah.